what is God's vision for work, if you try to actually implement that into your everyday work, I mean, that is really putting, the rubber meeting the road. It's really trying to work this out. So I've grown in this for sure. Like one of the, I'm got really passionate about this idea of mission of like, hey, what a great opportunity. Like, let's go participate in the redemption of all things, like making all things that are wrong right. We can do that in our work. And I think one of the ways I've grown, especially working at Denver Institute, is it's actually one of the primary ways God's making me more right. What's broken in me. He can use my everyday work to shape me to be more like him.
All right, welcome back, Ross Chapman. Give us a quick introduction, who you are, what you do.
Hey, my name's Ross, and I serve as the CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work.
What does that entail, or what does that mean for those of us who are not in the biz?
Well, it's a good question. It means a lot of things. But yeah, we're a small nonprofit in Denver, and we've been around 13 years. I've been in this role for 3 years, and my responsibilities are kind of getting to chart the course of where do we want to go and how are we stewarding the resources we have and the personnel that we have. And we have an incredible team, I think like a world-class team. And so when we are doing our work, which is really how do we help the church and people who are trying to follow Jesus think about what that means in their everyday work, because people spend the majority of their time, their waking hours, at work over the course of their life. And so we think that's a really important conversation. And so, we run a lot of content creation. We do a lot of convening, bringing people together who want to wrestle with those kinds of questions, learn from each other. We might guide the conversation a little bit. And then we hope to catalyze redemptive activity in people's workplaces, in their professions, in their industry. What would it look like for every industry to actually look like God's vision for that industry? Same for the workplace. And so we like to stir up those kinds of questions, give people opportunities to connect with others who are wrestling with those questions. And then how do we do it? How do we learn together? What does it actually look like in those different workplaces? So, I get to do staff leadership and fundraising and casting vision and working with our board of directors who are wonderful, and a whole lot of miscellaneous things in our initiatives and programs.
Sweet. So we've spoken before, and we spent a lot of time talking about kind of the abstract or the ideas behind the integration of faith and work. So today I want to dig in a little bit more to your story, but perhaps the first way to go there is when you talk about casting the vision, where is it that you are seeing in your current role, you are seeing the need? Like, where do you think that vision is headed in order to make an impact in our society and in businesses, in Denver right now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think two simple things. One is a theology challenge and one's an imagination challenge. We want to work on both. We have spent a lot more energy and time over our 13 years focused on the theology question, which is just, does God say anything about work that applies to what I do throughout the week? And we would say, absolutely. He says a lot. And you probably haven't thought about it enough because it doesn't get talked about a lot in a lot of church circles. So that's a big one. But I think the next kind of like, where does this go is, once I see what God's vision for work kind of is, and I recognize that in scripture and what that means, the next question is, what does it actually look like in my everyday work? And we think that's an imagination problem. So one of the cool things that's, I think, happening in the faith and work conversation across the country is there seems to be a bit more of an interest. It's a bit more cool to talk about, but sometimes it gets limited to like, faith and work. Oh, that's like sharing your faith at work. Or that's like investing my money in a Christian entrepreneur. And those are good things. We just think there's a lot more to explore than that. And we should take it deeper than that. And we should think about the kinds of products, the kind of policies, the workplaces that we have, not just seeing it as an instrumental value work. So like work leads to things that are spiritual, but work itself is not. We don't really think that's what scripture lays out. So, what does it actually mean then to practically see work as intrinsically valuable to what God is doing in the world? And, in fact, what he's doing in the world and in you, in your workplace. Um, so yeah, it's fun conversation. But those two main things are what we work on: the theology and the imagination gaps that people need when they enter their workplace, to have just a new vision for what it could look like there.
Nice. So unpack the why did you choose the word imagination? That's interesting to me, and unpack what you mean by that a little bit.
Well, we're staying in the abstract, Ian, but
We are. We'll get there.
imagination.
Don't worry.
Why imagination? I would say we chose imagination because in order for me or anyone to go into their workplace on a Monday morning with a renewed sense that God has a vision for work, that he cares about work, that he loves work, that he does work, and that he wants us to work. If we want to do anything with that, we need the capacity to see what it might look like. And I think there's kind of two main things there. One is to know the end of the story, what will be. And from a theological perspective, in Christian theology, there's this new city coming down from heaven. And I love to say that cities are full of work. And this is the city we all dream of living in. And so it requires a whole bunch of work. And so you just start imagining if that's what will be. And I think there's some good language in scripture to help us imagine what that is and see it. Our imagination ought to be then, how can I bend or point or shift my work towards that future reality? Not because you can make it happen, because that's God's work to do, but because you are able to give people a foretaste of it, a experience of it, a little like opportunity to say, this is what it's going to be. It's not going to be what it is now. And so to me, that is about an imagination for what will be that you can bring into the right now.
Love that. So in some sense, it's imagination is the skill of how the doctrine transforms our action or transforms how we approach our work itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, sometimes you hear theologians talk about the four chapters of the biblical story, but they can be framed in four simple words, like what ought to be, what is, what can be, and what will be. And I love that setup. So it's not what it ought to be, it is what it is. It's not what it can be, and it's not what it will be. If you can then start to imagine what will be, actually, that's necessary for you to start doing what could be. And we would say all of that is, participating with God in Christ for others, for the life of the world. So to me, the importance of imagination is you have to be able to see and know what will be for you to bring any sense of what can be into your workplace or industry.
Love that. All right. Hard pivot, although segue on. Did you ever imagine when you were a little child or whatever, that this is where you would end up investing your vocational time and effort?
Oh, what a great question, Ian. I mean, I definitely was 6 years old, dreaming about working at a nonprofit in Denver, being the CEO of a think tank slash educational convening organization.
Every little boy's
So,
dream.
yeah, no, I was dreaming about playing in the NBA. I was shooting hoops in the driveway every day.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, I grew up in church. My family was super involved, and I sensed kind of around late high school, like maybe I wanted to go work in a church. Like I was starting to think about that. So I went to a Christian liberal arts school, greatest place on earth, Taylor University. Quick shout out. And did a management degree and a Christian educational ministries degree, which was just what they had for kind of preparing for church work or nonprofit ministry work. And so it's kind of interesting. And I just reflect on this a little bit. Like I knew going in, I was still wrestling with, do I want to do church work or not? Maybe I wanted to go into business, kind of follow in the footsteps of your father, kind of thing. And I thought that would be fun. And so my intent was to do both of them at this small school and then transfer to a place that was specifically for church ministry preparation or like business school. So I ended up loving Taylor and just decided I wanted to stay. And I developed a bit of a discontent around, if I do want to go do church work, I think this management degree is going to be important. Because what I see in churches is people who feel led to become a pastor, they end up having to manage people and budgets and programming and communication strategy and all these things that actually are things that you might do in business or any kind of work. So I just decided that was an important thing. The interesting thing is they were two separate paths. There were no overlaps in any of those degrees. So it took me extra long to do those two degrees because I didn't get any classes to count towards both degrees, which is kind of interesting what I do now. But yeah, I went to seminary, started training for, I just wanted to spend more time in theological education and being as prepared as possible to go do whatever the church assignment was going to be. And met my wife while I was in seminary. She's from the same place I was from in Indiana. And we got married, moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And she went to work for an accounting firm, and I went to find a church to work at. In Charlotte, there happened to be 1,000 churches. And I was like, you know what? Surely one of them will want to hire. But I didn't find one to hire me. And so I ended up working at this nonprofit that was started by a group of churches that said, hey, I think if we work together, we can do a better job engaging younger generations, which meant like 20 somethings. And Charlotte's the second largest banking city in the country. Tons of young professionals moving there. And this was really a fun thing. It was like 300 or 400 or 500 people would show up on a Tuesday night, and my job was to help them connect with each other and local churches in the Charlotte area. Super fun. And that was great. I was like, man, this is awesome. I get to use my management degree and this like other degree that I have in this job. And a couple of years in, I got to do some preaching, and I wanted to focus on work. We were always kind of like, what are the key topics we want to talk about with this demographic? And it was like relationships, what is the church, and work was a big one. And so I started really leaning in on this and started talking more, with people about, what does the church say about work? Historically, have we really like given a lot of thought to what people do all the time? And you can go back to the Reformation and there's some stuff, and you can go further back and maybe there's a little less, and society now is way different. You had all this stuff change what work looked like the Industrial Revolution, and basically the idea that we can grow wealth for everyone is a pretty new idea in human history. There was kind of like a set amount of wealth, and whoever had it probably just exploited everyone to get it. Versus now we know we can create more wealth. And so there's all these things I was trying to learn, and the root of it was like, this is what we do every day. This is where we go spend all of our time. Like, how could we not consider what God might say about that? And so I just kind of got interested before I got frustrated with this idea that God demands more than our extra time and money to follow him and to work with him on his purposes.
That's interesting because I want to hear about the frustration. It sounds like the next, chapter, but already there's this bookend of at the beginning, your education, there was this sort of sacred secular divide in terms of which classes that you took and what it prepared you for, and never the twain shall meet, right?
Right.
And then when you got out into the workforce and now you're interacting with all of these real people, not professional Christians, they're asking the questions that reflect that sacred secular divide. This is how I spend all my time, and yet I have this bigger meaning, bigger purpose, bigger desire, and maybe even I profess faith, and I don't know how those two fit together in terms of how I spend my time, attention, what one says about the other, etc. So on both sides of your story up to this point, there's kind of, you have had a foot in both of those channels, if you will. But everybody else, it feels like, has kind of operated in one or the other.
That's totally right. Yeah. And then I would say personally, for me, this was a recognition that two things. One is like, if I was really going to go be a pastor somewhere, I knew Ephesians 4:12 told me that church leaders are supposed to be equipping people for ministry. And so that right there, it says like, my job is not to be the person in ministry, it's their job. But so then where are they? And are we actually equipping them for that? Are we kind of equipping them for church activities. And so that was going on. And then I was watching also and talking with my dad, who was in business and working at a public company in management. And, just learning more of his journey was like, yeah, he had moments throughout his career where he thought, maybe I should go work at a church, be like an executive pastor. And he was always really engaged, had been an elder, all kinds of stuff. And, eventually he had an opportunity to lead the company. And I just thought, man, like, here we are. The church is basically saying, like, you should wrestle with coming and like being the executive pastor or leaning more in with your spare time and doing, whatever you can do at the church, versus the church actually saying like, hey, that feels like a really big opportunity, an influential role to play. What kind of workplace are you going to create there at this company? How are you going to interact with all these different investors who have agendas? Are they agendas that align with God's vision for the world and what he's up to? How are you going to treat customers? What policies for your employees? Those questions were not on the table really in terms of like conversation with church. Of course, if you're following Jesus, you're probably hoping to like wrestle with these things on your own. Like, I want to make the best decision that shows love to my coworkers. That's hopefully in there, but we don't have a lot of imagination for it because we don't really celebrate or point to it. Think about what we celebrate in terms of roles in the course of church life. It is more the pastor or the missionary. Who do we commission? Who do we pray for before they go on their big work assignments? And that's all good. It's just that there's so many more that could be included in that. And so I just felt like, man, how do we encourage the church at work to recognize this is your primary ministry opportunity, meaning it's the primary way you can serve God and others. It's also the primary discipleship arena. It is the place where you're having to make hard decisions. It is where you get to live out the things that you believe mostly, even when it's hard, when it costs you something. Are you willing to take that cost? Are you willing to make that sacrifice because there's something more important in your life? There's a different leader at the top of your org chart than the boss or the board, right? And so I was like, man, I just want to spend my time encouraging people in that. So that was a huge part of my journey of just how did I get into this faith and work conversation. I ended up being a nonprofit founder back in Indiana, and the nonprofit was really focused on how do we help the church work together for the good of the city. I had a local business owner in Evansville basically recruit me back to wrestle with that question. And I think that was a really fascinating conversation about faith and work integration. So we got a successful entrepreneur in his late 60s. He says, I want my city to look more and more like what God would want it to be. And I know if everybody's just converted overnight to following Jesus, they just want to follow him and now they're Christians, that we're going to wake up that next morning with all the same problems. So what does it look like for us to work together to solve those kinds of things as well? And I thought that was a wonderful question. I wanted to spend my time figuring that out. And I spent a year listening, trying to like really know the city. And then the next couple of years, just convening churches and nonprofits. Probably every quarter we have 50 to 70 church leaders, and then separately nonprofit leaders, 50 to 70 of them. And we were sharing about the needs of the city and how do we work together and what does it look like to work together and how are we going to really solve this housing issue and like 40% of the population living to paycheck and third grade reading levels and foster care and all these things. And eventually I just, was like, wow, like nonprofits and churches are trying to solve these things by maybe asking people to give their spare time and spare money to solving them. And I was like, doesn't feel like we're going to get very far if we keep this strategy going. In fact, I think we've got like decades and decades of evidence to say it's not changing. More money, more investment there is not doing it because our best opportunity is actually where we go every day in our neighborhoods and in our work lives. And so I just thought, if we're going to solve the housing we've got to have people who are going to work at the bank and give loans start to see what they do every day as an opportunity to help solve that problem. And still, try to generate revenue to keep the jobs going. So I think, to me, that was where I was like, I'm all in on this conversation. Like, what an opportunity for the church of a city at work to participate in helping that city look more and more like what God would want it to look like. So that's where my passion comes from for it. That's kind of like my journey into this work that I'm doing now. And it feels just right on. Like, I'm so
Hmm.
excited about being with this team at Denver Institute and trying to work on these questions.
But is it fair to characterize it almost as like your own imagination sort of expanding through these experiences where, first of all, there's the two categories, then there's let's put this together with our spare time and spare money, and then like, well, we could go actually deeper and truer, like a more deeply integrated vision for this same thing is that there isn't really a distinction between the sacred and secular, and it's not just spare time and spare money. It's actually part and parcel with what we're doing already in our work.
Yeah. Well, to me, like, I think this is where theology meets the road. There's just, I think there's a disconnect in a lot of lives around the big philosophical questions or the theological questions and how we actually live. And if you apply what is God's vision for work, if you try to actually implement that into your everyday work, I mean, that is really putting the rubber meeting the road. It's really trying to work this out. So I've grown in this for sure. Like, one of the I'm got really passionate about this idea of mission, of like, hey, what a great opportunity. Like, let's go participate in the redemption of all things, like making all things that are wrong right. We can do that in our work. And I think one of the ways I've grown, especially working at Denver Institute, is it's actually one of the primary ways God's making me more right. What's broken in me. He can use my everyday work to shape me to be more like Him, and bring healing to things that are broken in my life, or become more aware of them, because it's where I spend so much of my time. Why would He not want to do that? And so, like, we've created a workplace culture here at Denver Institute that's really grounded in what we would say are our five guiding principles. It's a way of framing how we want to operate and work, how we want work to operate in our life. And it's been really formative for me. It's made me a certain kind of person in a way that I wasn't before. Um, and that was a super intentional choice. And just seeing, like, yeah, I spend a lot of my time with these people and these products and services, and getting them out in the world. And if we're intentional about it, we can recognize how that's shaping us, and we can be more proactive about it rather than just sort of letting it shape us.
Hmm.
Because it's true that something is always shaping us. We're either aware of it or we're not. And I would
So,
contend that work is shaping us like nothing else.
yeah, well, certainly the amount of time and attention and emotional energy and intellectual energy we put into it, we have to put into it. Um, it's the "you are what you eat" kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
adage. I want to zoom in a little bit on you express like not only contentment or feeling sort of wholly present in your role in a unique way, but also excitement for it. I'd love to just hear
Mm-hmm.
you uh, unpack that experience a bit, if you can, and reflect on in your work how common or uncommon that experience is. I should say, among the people with whom you work or you encounter in your work.
Well, that's a good question. I definitely see the work that I get to do now as a good fit with my passions, maybe some of my experience, and maybe some of my gifting. I mean, I think that is rare. That doesn't usually happen. If you look at human history, that rarely ever happens. And if you look in today's society, we have some assumptions. You could call it job choice privilege or something, where we actually try to choose our work, or go out and make our own job. Um, Being an entrepreneur, right? That's like the most valued, coveted sort of role. Like, oh, I'm my own boss. I get to make up my own work.
Until someone tries it. and then they realize
Until someone tries it. Yeah, it's
that
super
until
hard.
they realize that only like 20% of what you are actually doing is that thing that you want to do, and people may or may not want that thing, and the other 80% is all the crap that is the reason why a firm exists. So that's an aside, but
No,
go
you're
on.
spot on. But I think it's instructive for how we think about work. So I definitely see the job that I'm getting to do right now as, you know, a gift. I think it's a great fit and I'm enjoying it. And I think that's rare, which also makes it harder to speak into roles where, where I would be doing a job where I'd feel like I don't think this is my gifting. I think I can do more than this, or I'm underappreciated, or I don't think I'm in the right kind of work at all. I think those are realities for a lot of people, maybe even a majority. And what we would say, or what I would want to say, is we need to separate the idea of like calling, even in society's terms, like with a perfect job. Because one, I still do things I don't enjoy in my job. There's still tasks on my job description that I'm like, I don't like that part. I'm going to put that at the end of the week. But you have, if you can recognize, like, actually this job is an opportunity to express who I am. And for me, that would be, first of all, I'm a son of God. I'm in Christ. This is my truest identity. It's the truest thing about me. Um, I'm part of God's family. Therefore, when I show up in my job, whether I like the tasks or not, or I like the calendar schedule for the day, all those are opportunities to express who I really am. So I can either do it begrudgingly and frustratedly, or I can try to do it with joy, knowing that this job doesn't define me. It's not where I get my sense of worth and value. It is not the thing that God sees when he looks at me. He doesn't just see me as this, he sees me as his child. Like that is a better way to show up at work. Um, and to me, like, that's important because if you go out and let's say you finish college or you're done with high school, you're going out to find the job that you've always dreamed of doing, you feel called to do, you might even say, and you get out there and you do it for a year and you hate it, or you find out that people don't think you're good at it and you've lost this calling, you're kind of in a little bit of a crisis. But if you go out there and you take this job that you think you might be good at, you're interested in, and you go in with a sense of like, I know who I am, and this job doesn't define me. I just get to show up as who I am, and it doesn't work out, then okay, like, you're still who you are. Your value's not tied to it. You're just looking for the next thing, um, and I think that's freeing. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's the message society has for us when we talk about calling, and I don't even think the church talks about calling that way, but the Bible does. And I'm just so excited about that. I think that's hugely important for the way we need to approach work moving forward, kind of in like this. I mean, we're in the middle of a major work change. And I would love to see Christians and the church at work lead the way on how we think about work, how we approach work, what role it has in our life, how we show up at work, how we wrestle with AI questions, and how we treat people, and all of those things. I'd much rather see the church leading the way on that than us sort of letting whatever views and whatever visions of the future people might have dictate and shape how we show up at work.
Hmm. So let's talk about that. I want to hear about uh, what that ought to look like, and then what that probably, or I should say, your experience in the church trying to speak into those topics and issues. Um, but even before that, I do want to highlight one thing that I'm hearing you say around the liberty or the freedom that is categorically different when performance is an opportunity. You can go give your best with an open hand versus when performance is the source of identity and becomes a burden. If you don't perform and you're fired, or you don't get the rewards that you want, or you don't have the success that you want, where now that actually shapes your worldview and your experience of life. Those two things are categorically different experiences. And I don't think, in my experience, most Christians don't show up in the way that they might or the way that they are invited to in any context, but especially in work. You were, I don't know that you were, I just wanted to highlight that piece, but I would love to
Hmm.
hear your vision for, okay, first of all, what is the change that you're observing? And then how can the church uniquely speak into that?
Well, I think with COVID and then AI, like those two major factors kind of have influence, and we have a new generation entering the workforce, five generations in the workforce. Like there's a lot of things shaping our work right now, and I'd say AI in this like sense of wanting autonomy and remote work that only hits certain kinds of workers. Many people go to work and have to show up in the place of work because that's where the job is. There's no option for remote work. But I would
They
say
have a
this
real
has
job, not like you or me.
they have a real job, you know. Yeah. So I think that's impacting relationships. You know, if you think about um, where we are with relationships today, you know, we actually demand more. We would like to have more relationships in our workplace than we probably do because we are suffering from a lack of them outside of work. And so we show up at this place all the time. It would be nice to feel known, appreciated, seen, cared for, loved. The data is pointing to this reality. That's what people want out of their work. Not everybody, but generally speaking. And now we're being forced to continue asking this question, which maybe hasn't been as top of mind in society as it is now, which is what does it actually mean to be human? You know, what is uniquely human about us versus what AI can now do? Um, AI has surpassed human capacities already. So that's when we're thinking, processing data, synthesizing information. You know, PhD level answers it can do much, much faster than we can do and better. So, what does that mean then for us? It just, there's a lot of that going on. And so, what I would hope is that Christians can see AI as a tool that can either be used to further God's purposes in and through their lives, or it can do the opposite of that. And so, I think it's very important that we create, cast, and demonstrate a compelling vision for life and work in our workplaces. And I'm convinced that everybody, whether they can articulate it or not, has some kind of vision of the future, either for their individual lives or for society, that informs how they show up in their present activities. And that's why I think that that will be vision of what God lays out as heaven or this new city coming down to earth. Um, like that's got to inform the church so that we show up in a certain kind of way at work with that reality in mind. How do I shape my work and whatever agency I have in it, even if it's just I only have agency over my certain tasks instead of like the whole company culture or the products and service we make. You have some kind of agency. Move that towards the vision for the end or heaven or whatever that looks like, towards what actually God lays out for us. And and really it's kind of fun to look at this, even like Genesis 1 through 11. You know, humanity basically ends up creating a city and says, we're going to build this huge tower and we're going to have all this access. And basically, like, we don't need God. Like, what could we not do? God even says that. Like, what could they not do? So he basically disrupts that by giving all these different languages in the story. But then, like, the vision at the end in Revelation 21 is a city, which is a little surprising because, like, human beings put that city together. God kind of adopts that vision and says, this is what I'm actually doing, and this is the city you actually want to live in that you can't build because you long for eternity, you long for me, and if you exclude me from the city, it's not going to flourish. It just isn't made that way. And so if Christians can enter their workplaces with those kinds of ideas in mind, rather than like whatever AI technology company thinks is like the best vision of the future, because those are not necessarily the same. I think they're opposed often. Um, we need the church to show up and be present in a way that demonstrates a more compelling vision of the future than the ones that are currently in our workplaces.
So talk to me a little bit. We're thoroughly abstract now, but I hear you talking about connection and belonging being really significant, and that in some ways, the absence of connection and belonging outside of work puts even more focus and import. And it's not always appropriate, but people are desperate for connection and belonging because they're people. And so they go to work wanting that. And there's some inherent limitations there. Not the least of which is, maybe your role is just doing one thing that doesn't allow you to fully show up and be seen and known in that. And so there's some inherent tension with this idea of connection and belonging in our modern society. Then
Mm-hmm.
we layer in what this competing vision for the future of what that looks like, including work and beyond work. Uh, where do you see the like actionable gaps in the people that you work with for what would be the most helpful vision? What do they need to know or learn or discover to have some sense uh, of imagination, healthy imagination around what that is, and so that they can then show up in a healthier way and attain that connection and belonging that they actually long for?
Such a good question. I would say in the everyday work of interacting with people, look for the opportunities. Like they are there. Look for the opportunities to better know your coworkers, better know your client, better know your customer, better know your investor. Ask them questions about their life, their family, their hopes and dreams. Um, Demonstrate that you have an interest in them. A lot of times we are very focused in our work lives of making sure that people know we're good at our job, we're on top of things, we're interesting. But if we can extend that opportunity to say, hey, I'm interested in you, I care about you, I think those opportunities are more prevalent and more acceptable than we often perceive in the workplace. And I think they're going to be more welcome than ever because of this need for relational connection. So I had somebody say like, "Hey, is my employer going to recognize my humanity in like all this AI stuff?" And it's like, well, I don't know if your employer will. That's like a
Have to ask
concept,
them.
an employer, right? So your coworker can, and you can recognize the humanity of the people that you're interacting with. And I love to just challenge every person who says I want to follow Jesus to recognize Jesus first engaged you. So you first engage the people around you. And that will, one, help more people not experience this kind of isolation and loneliness that they are experiencing. And two, you as well, because you'll be interacting with people. So I just think what a great opportunity. Here we are, we're forced to work with people who are not like us, that we might not choose to be around, if we were just choosing where to live or choosing where to worship or choosing, what group we want to hang out with. You don't get to choose your coworkers, really. Maybe some, but generally they're going to be different than you. They're going to share different backgrounds, perspectives, experiences. They're not going to think like you think. And we live in a time where we don't interact enough. So we've got to get back to that. And I think it makes sense for Christians to lead the way. When you think about Jesus entering earth, you could say kind of he left one place to enter a workplace that wasn't so great. So he left this perfect work job, you could say, to enter into our space in our time and become like us, a messy workplace. And he took the responsibility and the ownership to engage us and to sacrifice for us. And I think we can model that in our workplaces in a really compelling way right now, especially.
Hmm. So you're describing like posture and a purpose and a way of being or a way of showing up and being present with others that um, is different categorically. Uh, if that is the solution, or if that's an improvement at least, right? And it's sort of person to person is how that grows. What is the role of the institution, whether that's the church or the business for that matter, but sort of the role of these concepts of these institutions to facilitate that move?
Well, I would love for all institutions to be able to facilitate workplaces or spaces where relational connectivity can happen and is encouraged in the natural course of things. One of, for example, one of our 5 guiding principles is embrace relationships. And we have decided, like, if that's going to be a guiding principle, how are we going to actually live that out? How are we going to demonstrate that? And so we've built it into our calendars, into our structure of meetings, our meeting matrix. 1 meeting a month on our staff team is just to catch up on personal, where you can talk about stuff that's going on that's exciting or hard at work. You can talk about as much as you want to share, like a personal thing that you'd want your coworkers to know about. Maybe it's a family thing, maybe it's a vacation coming up. It doesn't even matter if it's, deep. It's just something. And so institutions can provide those unique opportunities if they're intentional about it. I think, you know, institutions are not bad, but they are led by people, and people choose right and choose wrong, and people have priorities, and we're broken. And so it shouldn't be surprising to know that our institutions are not perfect. But just like you were saying, it's great to be an entrepreneur until you're like, oh yeah, like there's 80% of this that I don't think I'm great at, or it's really hard or whatever. And it's like, but if you succeed over time, 20 years from now, if you're still doing the work you're doing, it's like, it's probably going to look a bit more like a company, an organization, an institution, because we need a skeleton and a framework to grow.
Hmm.
So yeah, some of the reaction to institutions being evil, I think should be a corrective on how they can be, like a vision for what could be, versus like, let's just burn it all down. I don't think that solves the problem.
Yeah, that's interesting because I didn't necessarily intend that institutions is like the bad guy because your point is um, well made that institutions are just groups of people who are aligned trying to achieve something by cooperating instead of by being independent. So it's healthy in that respect. I think perhaps what was more front of mind for me is that institutions tend to just uh, fight the battle that was lost 20 years ago. They're sort of
Mm.
primarily, at least when I think of the church, they're sort of um, to the extent you can call it, a single institution is just often uh, feels like almost distracted trying to undo or redo the mistakes that they made and things they were oblivious to in the last generation. And so they're often silent in what's happening, the reality for the current generation. So your experience with, talking to all these folks in Charlotte who are in the workforce, young, and asking these questions about how to integrate it. Meanwhile, the church is probably, the pastor's giving a sermon about winning the culture war of the 80s or something like that. Something that these
Mm-hmm.
kids are like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about right now. So that's more what I had in mind about just like, uh, is there something, if you could give advice on what is most pressing right now to an individual church leader, much less sort of the institution as a whole, um, what are some things that you would focus on topically to equip them to meet the needs of their congregants fundamentally?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, Rather than being a sociologist, theologian type, I would say I would just quote one of my favorite pastors, one of our church, I mean, maybe a lot of people's favorite pastors, Eugene Peterson, who said the shepherd should smell like sheep. And I think, at least in my experience, and even in my training, um, student ministry, all the way through college ministry, is all about going and being with the students where they are. go on their campus, go to the games, hang out, after school with them, show up and have a lunch, all these kinds of things. And then once people get older, it's not like that anymore. It's like you come to the thing on Sunday, come to the Wednesday night gathering, you come to us, and like this, that's not bad necessarily. Like we have sort of the family activities where we all contribute and have roles to play. But those family gatherings are to remind us of who we are, what our purpose is. And so, it makes a big difference when a pastor shows up at somebody's workplace and starts to wrestle with the questions that they wrestle with alongside them, with them. And I think that's a very Jesus-like thing to do. And I think that will answer this question. It's going to be almost natural for a church leader to be kind of talking about the right things if they spend time with people in their workplace, in their neighborhood, and they see it. And so I would just say keystone activity for a church leader, in my opinion, I would just encourage start with one workplace visit a month and try to get it up to once a week over time. Just say, hey, Joe, can I come hang out with you in the hospital? Just see what you do as a nurse or a doctor or whatever your role is. We can go to lunch afterwards, go to breakfast, whatever, but I want to spend like a good hour just seeing what you do. Then you're seeing like, how's this person using AI? How's this disrupting their work? How are they interacting with patients and with their coworkers? What are the pressures they have for a number of patients to see? What are the pressures for the boss, that they're working with, or competing views from doctors on how to provide care? You start to see all the details of like things that they're working on, and that's going to make you a better preacher. It's going to make you a better leader. It's going to make you a better kind of like, let's focus on the right things. What should we be talking about? And what I love about it is it ends up encouraging Joe, who's at the hospital, going like, oh, my pastor thinks this is valuable work and is praying for me about the things that really matter at my workplace because he knows them. I just think that's not rocket science, but
Yeah.
also super hard to do because of how much time it takes.
Well, so that's the time is significant, obviously. But the question that was coming to my mind is, so why is it that in young adult ministry, you mentioned like college ministry or whatever, we recognize, hey, the way that you create formation or transformation is through presence. It's through a relational encounter and a sense of connection and belonging and trust that is shaping. We recognize that at a period in ministry or a period in a person's life, but before that, it seems to be a whole lot more informational and institutional. And then after that, it's also informational and institutional, right? You just learn about God and you learn about this thing. When the crux of the whole thing is we recognize that transformation happens in this context. And theoretically, like our statement of faith would suggest that we recognize that transformation, personal transformation happens through relational encounter with Jesus Christ himself, like the person of Jesus. So it's in our doctrine. It's in a particular slot of life, right? Or slot of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like for most of it, including the beginning and the latter parts, that approach of connection and belonging and relational based transformation is completely absent. And we just lob information at people and expect that they're going to benefit from that somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit circular because the people in the pew expect certain things out of the church leader now, right? Like, oh, well, we want to be a great communicator. We want Sunday morning to do X, Y, and Z. They should have kids ministry. They should have all this stuff going on. And that's all because the church exists to serve us. Well, I mean, that's not really the point of church. It doesn't exist to serve you. In fact, you're just part of it. You exist to serve Jesus and his bride, like that's, so we've got that backwards. And then I think there's a bit of that sacred secular divide, which is like, I'm expecting my pastor to do all the spiritual work for me. And so we've gotten in this potential habit of getting what we need every weekend and now learning to sort of grow and feed ourselves. So that's part of it. I think another part is, in youth ministry, student ministry, the scale's a little different usually. So you might have a youth leader or youth pastor, student ministry person who's got, 50 kids. If you scale that up, it's probably 300 adults, and you've got one senior leader or something. Well, that person can't do that. So like now you've got to have your governance structure. Maybe it's an eldership structure, maybe it's small groups, but you've got to rely on other people like leading one another. And I think that can be very challenging. We also have a very fragmented society, especially in bigger cities. Some of my doctoral work was on this, but we live in a place that's fragmented. So I'm not doing church community with like people who live next to me. Generally, I'm driving 20 minutes to some place on Sunday morning. I'm working with other people. I'm going to like school functions with another group of people. Um, you know, Social life might be totally outside of those realms, and so we have less overlapping circles maybe than we would that would be beneficial if we had that to our formation. So in light of all that, it's like, well, what does the church leader think is most helpful? Like, oh, I'm going to make sure
Yeah.
Sunday morning's great. I'm going to help provide some kind of structure. But yeah, I think there's a lot of factors. I don't think it is like church leaders just aren't showing up for their job, right? Like it's
No,
not
it's
that.
not. It's not critical
So
of them. I think like what I'm wondering is like this might be the only context in the world in which the professional version is less good, less effective than the amateur ranks, right? Where as the ministry professionalizes and abstracts away from the transformational work to running an organization, to preaching, to doing these things which are good, but are, um, they're less effective at shaping the uh, congregants or the community, then the amateur version is just you doing a great job in your work and loving your coworkers well and loving the people you serve well. And so, I mean, I'm reminded of Chesterton's, quote about being an amateur, which is the root word is love, and it's the thing that you do in spite of being bad at it, because you love it. And so, like Christianity might be in what you're describing, the dynamics you're describing might be the only place where the amateur version is superior to the professional version.
yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. Like I don't like the idea of professionalized church roles. Conceptually, are they needed? For sure. But when we professionalize them, we associate so many other things with that. So now the responsibility is on them and not me. Um,
Well, and that's fair
but
that a lot of the problem is actually the expectations of the people who are engaging the professionals. It's not their fault per se. It's what we expect. And that person that you described sitting in the pew on Sunday morning saying, "Serve me," that is what they're asking for. And yet it's not what they actually need. What they really want is connection and belonging. And you don't get that from some some guy, talking at you from the stage. You get that from what you do the rest of the week, from your community, from the relationships that you have. So it's also on the congregants who are asking for the the wrong thing, or they're asking in the wrong category. Uh,
totally.
yeah. So
Well, yeah, yeah, you're right on there. And I think we've, it's like a church that gets up on Sunday morning and says, "Hey, church family, we need you to step up and be the church. Here's all the volunteer opportunities we have." And when they say we, they mean all the things we have that are church-led activities: nursery, parking lot, serve on the music team, usher, serve communion, whatever those things are. And in one sense, that is being the church. This is like the family gathering. Here we are coming together, and we have a bunch of roles that need to be filled, which is great. Um, but that's not the only way we're going to be the church. You're going to go out after that gathering, and you're going to be the church the rest of the week, wherever you are. And that means showing up in your workplace, looking for people who might be isolated and lonely to say, like, how are you doing? Tell me something about your life. I mean, whatever the question is. Or it's recognizing like, hey, I'm here in this workplace and I can see that we have a policy that's kind of holding back some people. And I want to talk to somebody about that. Or that customer that we talked to last week, he was very upset. I just want to call and check in, because I don't have to. It's not on my job. It's not, I'm not gonna. It's not on my performance review, but I'm gonna do it because I think that's important. Or I'm gonna remember that when I have my performance review this week with my boss, that's not my worth. That's not my value as a person. But it is an indication of if I can be better at my job or not. And so I care about that. So I don't know. I just think those, like, just showing up in that way, like recognizing the church at work is the church scattered and where it has so much exponential influence. So I have great hope. And I think it's exciting to see many people interacting and wrestling with this faith and work integration question and saying, like, hey, when I show up at work, I recognize that God has me here for this season, maybe not forever, but he has good work to do in me and good work to do through me.
Let me ask you this as we wrap up here. I asked you the question about if you could give three things or something, to the institutional leaders. What about the same question to the individual who's the laity, the Christian who's going to work and wants to make concrete steps towards enjoying their work more, understanding it more as being part of their faith rather than a mission field or something like that. What concrete advice or encouragements would you give them?
Well, I would say work from the state of rest that you have because of your faith in Christ and because of his love for you. That removes some anxiety. That removes some sense of loneliness and isolation to just recognize, like, Jesus is here with me. I think that's big. I think another one is to remember that your value and identity is not tied to your performance, your quota, your business activities. It is actually out of your identity that you do those business activities rather than the other way around. And then the last one, who do you need to connect with? Who do you need to talk to today? Who's around you that you can just show a little kindness, extend mercy. Could be just a word of encouragement. Could be, let's grab coffee. Could be, great job on that project. Whatever it is, be known for being the person who sees and notices and engages.
Love that. Ross, thanks for coming on again. And we still talked a lot abstract because that's what we do. But really
We did.
enjoyed hearing your story and some of those more concrete, practical takeaways that hopefully are actionable for folks who are, whether they're in the sacred side, the professional side, or the secular. So it's not really, but the amateur
Yep,
side, we'll
that's
call it.
right.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
Yeah, Ian, thanks, man. Thanks for the questions and the fun conversation.
Yeah, we'll see you again soon. My name is Ian Crawford. I collect untimely ideas, build frameworks for living with purpose, and coach executives on redeeming leadership. For more conversations, our email newsletter, and topical collections of untimely ideas, visit our website at untimellyideas.com. Until next time, hustle less, hope more, connect more deeply.